Okay, so this session is introduction to Sass and Compass. My name is Andrew Kevy. My contact info stuff is on there. And that's everything on that slide. So I work at VML. I'm a lead application developer. I code in PHP, and I'm currently learning Python as well. You can certainly ask me about mandolin, DIY recipes, which includes, when I say recipes, I really mean not cooking recipes, but products like shaving cream and deodorant and hair products. I actually make that stuff, which is weird, but I do. So I'm wearing two of those things right now. And also ramen hacking. All of my coworkers can attest that I have ramen every day for lunch, and I throw away the packet because there's like crazy amounts of sodium in that thing. So coming up with different ways to use ramen, just to like cook the noodles, drain it, and then add your own sauce and meat and stuff like that is actually pretty cool. So anyway, it's a cheap lunch if you're ever interested. You can also ask me about Mystery Science Theater. I'm a pretty diehard fan. Grew up on the stuff. And I also do some sous vide cooking. And if you're not familiar, that is cooking food in a vacuum sealed bag and putting it in a highly controlled temperature water bath. It's pretty awesome. You can make some excellent steaks out of some really cheap meat. That's another talk, though. I could go on that for a while. That's my family up there in the corner. Okay. Before we start, how many people kind of know what Sass is, or know what Sass is? How many people have actually used Sass? That's awesome. Okay, cool. You're the right audience. All right, so what is Sass? Sass is a pre-compiler for your CSS. In other words, you end up with CSS. Okay, so this isn't some magical language that you need special plugins for your browser. That is. You compile your CSS while you develop, and you can also include it in your deployment process. A lot of our teams do. And again, this is not Drupal specific. Keep that in mind. It can be used on any project, any language. We've got people using it on Java projects at work, .NET projects at work, and PHP projects. So this is totally agnostic. So just keep that in mind. It is a superset of CSS. So what that means is it is, I'm going to close this door, that's cool. It is an extra functionality on top of CSS. You can throw CSS into it and it works, but you can also, it opens up a whole new level of coding for your styles. A lot of things that you probably have been thinking, oh, it'd be great if this were in here. It'd be cool if I could do this with CSS, but I can't. Sass is written in Ruby. Other implementations exist of Sass. And when I say it's written in Ruby, that means that the compiler is written in Ruby. The actual language that you're writing when you're developing Sass is not Ruby at all. Okay, so keep that in mind. Don't get scared. If you don't know Ruby, you don't have to know Ruby. There's really no Ruby involved when you're doing this. It just, the command that you type to compile your Sass happens to be written in Ruby. But there are other implementations. There's one called libsass, which is written in C, which makes it extremely fast. But there's downsides to that. There's also one written in PHP as well. So the reason that you would want to use the Ruby version over the others is that much of the libraries, the library environment that exists for Sass includes some Ruby element to it. So if you use some other implementation of the compiler, you won't have access to Compass. You won't have access to Suzy or some of the other pretty popular Sass libraries. But again, it just requires installing Ruby if you don't have it. If you're on a Mac, you already have it. You just don't know it. If you're on Linux, it's just an apt-get or a yum or whatever package manager you're using to get Ruby installed. And after that, it's kind of like it's hands-off Ruby. Sass allows for rapid development of your styles. And the reason is because you are typing, in theory, you're typing less. You are typing your selector chains, you're not retyping your selector chains over and over and over again because you're able to nest, and I'll go into that a little bit later. You're able to build all of your color schemes and put those into variables, so you don't ever have to remember what's that hex code again for that blue that I'm using. I got to go back in and find that element, remember what kind of blue I'm using. It's in a variable. You just throw it in there whenever you need it. And it allows for easily organizing your styles for the same reasons. You're able to group things together, and you're also able to do things like partials. And when we get into the demo section, somebody remind me to do partials. It's really easy. You're basically breaking out chunks of your code and putting them into separate files, and when you compile, it all goes into one big file. So while Drupal offers the great CSS aggregator, which you should still use, you're kind of doing an aggregation on your own. And that's one way I recommend doing styles, is having one file that just includes all of your partial files. And it makes it a lot easier because then you can break out your styles by content type or by page if you've got a whole bunch of custom pages that you're dealing with. So organizing your code is way easier. And it's completely logical. CSS to me is not super logical. It's just basically you're just spitting out facts at it, but it's not able to really act on those facts. You're just building, properties. Whereas with this, you're able to do functions, you're able to do conditionals, and you're able to do math, for that matter. So what Sass is not. Does not require a knowledge of Ruby, like I said before. It is not a client-side interpreter, meaning your end user's browser has no idea that you compiled in Sass. What results is CSS when you're all done, and the browser doesn't even know, doesn't care. So you don't need any kind of special module for your end user's browser just to use it. There is an alternative to Sass that I'll bring up in the next slide that actually does allow for client-side interpreting. Because it's not a client-side interpreter, it doesn't add any overhead. And it's not a framework. This is not something that will replace Foundation, Bootstrap, 960 Grid. It's not that. It can be used in conjunction with this, and I'll mention that in a little bit. I'll mention it right here. I didn't realize the book was right there. So there are frameworks available. Suzy and Neat are Sass-based grid systems, but there's also a Foundation and a Bootstrap flavor written in Sass. I think it's actually maintained by both of those communities. So you can bring in maybe a grid framework that you're familiar with right into Sass and use the extra functionality in those. So there are alternative CSS preprocessors out there. These are Stylus is probably the biggest competitor with Sass. Stylus is written in Node, and it has pretty much, I think, 80% of Stylus is like exactly the same as Sass. All the functionality is the same. There's a bit 20% difference in functionality, and I think those tend to lean more towards edge cases. So you could use Stylus as well if you are if you like Node. You could use Stylus and do the same types of things. And there are probably libraries for those. I haven't messed too much with Stylus, but I'm sure there are libraries out there that are equivalent to the Suzy or the Compass libraries. Less is another preprocessor that was one of the early ones, very early preprocessors. And I believe it started out as a client-side interpreter, meaning you would write all of your styles in less and put it on the server, and the browser would then suck that up and then get interpreted via JavaScript. That's cool. It's great because you don't have to compile. The problem is that all the browsers do. So you've got extra overhead, and you will probably end up with a flash of unstyled content. And then Myth is another one that I think recently came out, and that one doesn't contain the functionality of Stylus or Sass. It basically encourages you to write in proper CSS3, and then it backports all of your code into CSS2. So that's just another thing to keep in mind. So what is, any questions before I go? I'm going to go into some of the cool features of Sass. Okay, so what does Sass have that CSS doesn't? It's got two syntaxes. You get to pick. There's SCSS, and there's the Sass syntax. So it's a little confusing when you're talking about Sass. Are you talking about the syntax, or are you talking about the actual compiler? So SCSS is if you're new to Sass, this is where you want to start. You want to use SCSS because why that looks like CSS. That's exactly what it is. It is curly brackets, semicolons for end of lines. It looks just like CSS, which means you can copy and paste your current CSS, throw it into an SCSS folder, compile it to Sass, and it works just fine. The Sass, and we'll use SCSS today in our examples. The Sass syntax looks a bit more like Ruby or Python, where you are, I guess I could probably turn the slide off. Hopefully you don't fall asleep. Just realize that's, is that okay for everybody? Yes. You're not going to fall asleep? Okay. So this is more like Ruby and Python, where you don't have curly brackets. All of your code blocks are indented the same amount, and your ending of lines is just a return. There are some shortcuts in the Sass syntax which allow you to do like function calls a little bit easier. I tend to like the Sass just because it forces me to make my styles look pretty from a code standpoint. Variables. So CSS does have variables, right? I mean CSS 3, right? But it's not super supported. So you kind of really can't use them. It's great that they're there, but you can't use them. But with Sass, it's great because this compiles down to CSS just fine. So we've got variables we can use. Variables look super familiar because they start with a $sign. The only thing is that we're assigning values with a colon, just like you would in CSS. So, so we've got, I think my syntax highlight's going to get screwed up today, but so you've got your variable $sign, and you can assign colors to them, and you can use any type of CSS color value, be it RGB, RGBA, HSL, HSI, words for the colors, the hex values. You can use all those things. Units. So you've got your pixels, your ems, your percentages, all that stuff can be stored in there as well. Strings and lists. So strings, you can put in a string, obviously quote it, and actually you don't necessarily have to quote it, now that I think about it. And you can also do lists, and lists are either comma or space separated. Lists are kind of cool because if you just put the variable out there to use, it will just spit out the list as a comma separated list, string, I should say. But you can also go in there and actually loop through them if you want to. You can go and say, I want the second value out of my list, and pull that out as well. So there's a lot of neat functions you can use with lists. Booleans, true, false, and maps. So maps are relatively new to Sass. They came out in Sass 3.3, which is, I believe, the current stable version. Basically, you're allowed to do a kind of like an associative array. It's a key value pair. So you set up your variable and you put in some key and some value. I'll show you how you can pull those out. So using variables. So we're going to use those variables that we just talked about. We're going to use them in here. The first thing I want to mention is the top one, the one in green up there. This is called interpolation. So basically what that means is normally you would use a variable as a value for a property, for one of your style properties. But you may want to use it as an actual class name in your selector. So you can use interpolation for that. And that's just using the hash and the curly brackets to say, I want to use the literal value and stick it into my, and you can also use that for the actual attribute as well. So maybe that pool class is color, so I could put background dash and then my interpolation for the word color. So you can include that into properties as well. So using variables, it's pretty straightforward. You just call it. So we've got our background color in there, we've got our height in there, we've got an if statement, so we use the at and then an if, and then we can put some sort of conditional in there, or something that would something that would result in a Boolean. So in our case, we're just putting the variable in there, or yeah, putting the variable in there. But we could do some sort of greater than equals 2 if we wanted to. And if that is true, then it will add in the style that we've got enclosed in our brackets. And then for the font style, remember we had that map, which is that key value pairing. And so we use the map get function to give it the list and give it what key we want to pull the value from. Okay, so it's not like an object, or where you can just do an arrow to pull in, or even brackets like like an array. It's a little bit more. Yeah, it's a little more tricky, but you can do a lot more things with the maps as well. I'm not going to get into that for today because we don't have enough time. So this is our SCSS, and let's say we run our Sass compiler on it. What does it look like? And my code did not come out the way I wanted it to. Hang on one second. We're going to do this. Let me view it this way. I think it'll work this way. Oops. Yeah. Okay, there we go. Now we've got something we can look at here. So I've color coded everything so that what we called in the SASS matches with what's compiled. So we did our interpolation. So way pool came in there. You can see our background color came in there. Our height came in there. We just put in that whole list value, and it spit it all out, and it had nice spacing in there and everything. And then we pulled out that map value. So that's how it compiles. So that looks like regular CSS, even though what we started with in the SCSS is just a superset. Nesting. This is the one thing that I had always dreamed of when I was dealing with CSS, because having to do selector changes is a nightmare, in my opinion. So we've got nesting. So rather than putting article h1 as your selector string, you can actually stick the h1 inside your article block. So this will all compile down to to a selector chain of article h1, article A, and then article A h1. There's an ampersand here. The ampersand as a selector means grab the entire selector chain that I'm in the middle of. So I'm in the middle of A article, and now I'm going to put something else after it. This could be a class. This could be an ID. This could be, you could put a space here if you wanted to. You would really want to do that. But and then you could tack on something to the end of it. It's like you're appending something onto the end of whatever selector you're currently in. So in this case, this would be an article A with the pseudo class of hover. Does that make sense? Okay. In Sass 3.4, which I can't remember when that's coming out, you can do a lot more with this parent selector. You can actually pull out like the nth selector out of your current chain and some other stuff. It's pretty cool, but I haven't had a chance to use it yet. So this is what we compile down into after we've run Sass on the file. So you can see that our article came in just fine, and it chained up the article in H1, chained up the article A, and then it did article A pseudo-class hover. So you can see that this can really cause you to organize your code better. And this also makes it really easy to refactor, because you might end up having to change a class on an early on selector that affects 10 different styles. And rather than going in and having to do a find and replace on your CSS, let's say, for example, we're no longer dealing with an article tag. We're dealing with a div now. I don't have to go through and go div, 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 div. I can just go up there and say div once, and the rest of it will fall into place. So you are less likely to miss having to make a change when you're refactoring code. Math operators. So we've got our basic math operators: addition, subtraction, division, multiplication. You need to, two things you need to worry about. Your units need to be the same. You can't put pixels and m's together; that would break. And also, when you're doing division, you need to put your division in parentheses. The reason is because the font size, you can do it like the font size, which is your font, and then slash your line height. It's a shortcut in CSS, so that slash is actually used in CSS for other functions. So, so just remember that you need to have your division in parentheses, and it will do order of operations correctly. Color map. This is cool. This is really cool. So you can add colors together. And why you'll do that is comes in a little bit later. But you can actually add two hex colors together. You can multiply a hex color. And the really cool thing about Sass, I think, is the ability to use color functions. You can darken, you can lighten, you can change the hue, the saturation. You can find the complement. So all you have to do is use the darken function. And you give it a color. You could explicitly state the color here, or you could use a variable, and then how much you want to adjust it by in percentage points. So we're saying here we want to take this color and darken it by 10%. So and you can nest all those in together. And the cool thing about it is you can actually build an entire color scheme off of one color. You just give it a color, and then you say, oh, I want the complement, I want to darken that by 10%, and then you can build out this huge color scheme. So you could theme an entire, color theme an entire website with one color change. Can't guarantee that's going to look great, but you could. And we've got rounding functions as well. So you've got rounding, flooring, ceiling, all that's available. Extending selectors. So oftentimes, if we want to share styles between two different selectors, or I'm sorry, between two different elements on a page, and we want to augment one of those styles, we could say, okay, we've got this error message that's showing up, so we'll give it a class of error. But we may have this really super critical error. So I want to just expand the border. Okay? So I could just put an error in my HTML, and then I could also put in critical error, so the critical error would only have a border width of 3 pixels. And so you're adding all these classes in your element, and that can get confusing. So you're able to actually extend previous selector styles. So once you've defined a selector like error, and we've got a border and a background of red, and I want to make a serious error one, I can say, well, I want everything that's in error, but I also want to add in a border width of 3 pixels. So that compiles down to this, which wasn't initially what I expected to see. I expected it to copy this stuff and put it into here. But what it does is it actually adds serious error to grab these as well, which makes more sense because it's less code. And then it will add serious error with the additional augment of increasing the border. Does that make sense? Makes sense. Makes sense. Cool. They're basically functions. You can pass in parameters. So what I've got here is a link mixin. So you define a mixin by using the at mixin. You give it a name, just like function. Consider this the word function from a PHP standpoint. We've got the link color. We have a parameter called base color and a parameter called border width. And that border width has a default value. So that one doesn't have to be given when you're calling that. So you can see here that I have access to these now, and I can put in a base color, and I'm going to darken it, and I'm going to get the complement of that base color, and then I've got my border width. So all of this, by itself, without this guy down here, would compile to nothing, unless you call it. Okay? So now I've got an A, and I'm going to include my link color, and give it the base color of yellow. And I'm not giving it the border width, so it's going to default back to 1 pixel. And so this is what gets returned. Here's my color yellow, which is from there. my hover, and here's my color of the hover, and that's because I darkened it by 20%. Okay, so my color is actually dark yellow. And then my border bottom is now 1 pixel solid in blue, because blue happens to be the complement of yellow. If you put in a hex color there, it would probably give you another hex value. One of the other cool things about Sass is that if you give it a hex color, that actually is a word. If you give it red and hex, it will actually translate that into red for you. So it will actually output the word. It's kind of neat. So plugins and libraries that are available for Sass. Again, so these are kind of like some basic building blocks. There's a lot more you can do with Sass, but we only got 45 minutes. So there are mix-in libraries, so a bunch of functions that you can use. Compass and Bourbon are two very good ones. Compass is has Ruby-based code in it, so that one would be installed as you would with Sass, and I'll go over some installation on the next slide. Bourbon's another great one. I think Compass has a bit more functionality than Bourbon. Bourbon actually, you can actually just include the files in your Sass folder. You don't have to install a Ruby gem to get it, but it does lack some functionality. Two popular grid frameworks: Suzy, which is based on Compass, and Neat, which is based on Bourbon. So it's Bourbon Neat. So those are really good. You're probably familiar with the grid frameworks where you have to put in like span3 as like your class name. Well, with Sass, you don't have to worry about presentational class names anymore like those. You can actually say, here's an element like article, and I can put in a mixin that says span3. So that actually goes right into the style itself without you having to go into the markup and actually add classes to it to tell it to span 3 or 10 or whatever. And it also does all of the percentage math for you too. So you could say, well, I want 32 columns. I want 5 columns to work with. And then you can say, I want to span this particular article to be 2 of 6 columns. And it will do the math and come up with a percentage for you. A few other ones, breakpoint. I use breakpoint almost all the time. It's an easy way for you to handle media queries. Obviously, we've done media queries where you just get a big media query block, and it's hard to jump around to go, wait, where did I put that menu? Because I need to mess with the menu in both the mobile and the desktop layout. Well, with breakpoint, you can actually plug in how you want it to act on a mobile device or on a desktop device in the actual main selector itself. So you don't have to jump around to different media queries. You can do it in context, which is really nice. And Sassy buttons is really cool because you can do glossy buttons and matte buttons and flat buttons and borders and rounded and shadows, and when you click it, it actually kind of presses in a little bit. So that's a really nice library as well. So how do we install? On a Mac, it's easy. You go into terminal, type sudo gem install Sass. You'll have to put in your password, and you're done. Linux, it's just about as easy. You just need to make sure you have Ruby installed. Gem is the package manager for Ruby, just in case you didn't know. So it's like doing an apt-get or a YUM or something like that. And then on Windows, obviously Windows always has to be tricky. You have to get the Ruby installer, and then once you've got it, then you can run gem install Sass, and you'll have it. Okay, 10:30. Okay, so I'm going to do a little live coding for you. Are there any questions before I get into that? Okay. So I'm going to bring up a terminal here. And let me bring in. Did I do that wrong? This needs to go here. This one needs to go here. Oh no. Okay. My bad. All right. So we've got a style CSS here that is, or SCSS file that's empty. So I can actually compile this if I wanted to. So let me. So down here in my terminal, I'm going to run Sass on that file. So I'm going to cd into the where am I? Okay. So I'm going to run Sass on it. So I do Sass, and I tell it the file that I want to convert, and I tell it what file I want it to convert to. Okay, so I'm telling it, hey Sass, I want to convert styles SCSS into styles CSS. And I can hit enter. And now if I update here, we'll see that I have a CSS file here. And I look at it, and it's empty. Yay. So let's do some real stuff here. All right, so if we've got, let's say we've got our body class, and we want to give it a background color of black, and we have an H1 in there that we want to give a color of white. Okay, I run my Sass. You see it does a little bit of indentation for you automatically, but this is regular CSS here. So that's great, but I got to keep running this silly Sass function to get my styles. That's not fun. Sass comes with a watch parameter that you can put in here. Okay, so now if I make a change, and I save that. Change detected to styles at CSS, right styles CSS. Okay, so as soon as I saved it, it recognized it, and if I update there, you'll see that it actually added it in for us. So that's how Sass works. Now you may want to do an entire directory. You may not want to just compile one file all the time. So you can look at the Sass parameters. You can actually give it an entire directory. Say, hey, take this directory. Usually I call it Sass. And then compile everything in there into this other directory called CSS. So in your Drupal theme, alongside your CSS folder, you should have a Sass folder, and then you can just code everything in Sass and then let it compile the CSS. Don't touch the CSS because it'll get overwritten. Okay, so you can look at it for sure, but don't touch it because it's going to get overwritten on your next Sass compilation. Compass, which you install the same way that you do with the same way that you do as Sass with the gem install Compass. Compass actually handles a lot of this work for you. You can say Compass init on a directory, and it will build out a CSS directory, a Sass directory, put some default styles sheets in there, and then it will then compile it up for you automatically.
Compass is?
Compass is?
What is Compass?
Compass is a set of mixins that are built on top of Sass. And then it's actually a command line interpreter. It uses Sass. It's like a wrapper around Sass. So you can type in Compass rather than Sass down here. I can do Compass watch. Okay. Now I didn't have to tell it where everything was, because Compass creates a configuration file. And what you do is you give it, hey, here's my path, my HTTP path that these are going to live. That's the root of where these are going to live. Here's my CSS directory. Here's my Sass directory. Here's a directory to images. Why would I want that? Compass is cool because you can actually give it relative image URLs. So if you want to put a background image on something, you can, rather than typing URL parentheses and then give it the path, you can type in image-URL and just give it the name of the image. And it will go back here and say, oh, you've got everything with images. So you can move your images folder all around and then just update it here, and all of your styles will then know where those images are. I'm still not sure about the JavaScripts yet. I haven't had to use the JavaScripts very well. I always set it just in case. Yeah, and there are different output styles as well, I should mention. There's nested, which is what we're seeing over here. This one's nested. This is the nested output style. There's expanded, which is what you normally think of when you're looking at CSS, which is all expanded out. And then there's also one compact, which is where you've got your selector and all the styles on a single line for each selector. And then there's compressed, which is where all the white space is taken out. So you can adjust what style by using the output style setting there. So Compass now knows all the directories, so you don't have to specify which files you want to be converting. You can just say Compass watch, and it'll go and look at and watch those directories. One thing I would like to show you, I know that we're probably running short on time here, is two cool functions of Compass. One mixin that it allows you to do is box shadow. So I can say I want a box shadow of black, and you specify your shadow parameters. That's probably not a very good shadow, but now, another cool thing, you get errors. So you can figure out if you've got a syntax error in your styles. So this tells me, hey, I don't know what box shadow is. Well, that's right, because we need to actually import Compass. And so if you're going to include, this is the same way you would include partials as well. So you could have these extra files that are in here, and you could import them in. So now we can see that it was modified and it was updated. Thank you. Styles was updated. Come on now. What did I do wrong? Include box shadow, blah, blah, blah. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong one. I'm sorry. There we go. Sorry. So, expand that. It puts in the extra browser prefixes for us. That's another great thing about these mixins that you can make it. And Compass knows about all the browser prefixes, so we don't output those for you, so you don't have to worry about it, which is really nice. You'll also notice that it actually puts lines back. It puts comments in there, so you know which line of your Sass created this. You can see those comments there. You can pull those out if you want to. Or if you're familiar with source maps, you can use source maps as well. So that's that. And then the other thing you can do is build image maps, or sprite maps, excuse me. So I've got a big old directory here full of sprites. And if I grab this right here, save that. We're going to see down below, it sees that my style sheet was updated, and it's going to actually create a map for me, a sprite map. So if I look back at my images directory, suddenly I've got a huge sprite map already ready to go. And then this allows me to bring in one of these sprites, and you'll want to read the documentation on this on the Compass website. I can bring in one of these sprites, and if I look at my CSS now, it happens to know what position that image is in. So I don't have to do any of the math trying to figure out what position this image is in for the sprite map. And it also looked at my files and saw that there was a $_hover image and realized, oh, hey, that's probably a hover image. So I'll go ahead and put that in there for you as well. So it actually handles a lot of heavy lifting as far as sprite maps are concerned. This is something that Compass has, but Bourbon does not have. So we are at time. I'm sorry, I had to like blow through all that stuff. I'd like to do like a Sass BOF. If anybody's interested, we can certainly set that up. And also, there's a later session dealing with Susie, Compass, Sass by Carl Kodrowski later on this afternoon. So if you want to get more Sass, you can definitely go to that. 2:15, thank you. Okay. Sorry I didn't have time for questions. There's a lot to cover.